Boy buys bouquet of flowers daily. Cashier follows him and breaks down in tears. Every day, without fail, a boy walks into the small flower shop on the corner. He's young, maybe 10 or 11, with dark skin and an air of quiet determination. His shoes are scuffed from running around the neighborhood, and his clothes are a little worn. But none of that matters when he steps inside. He goes straight to the same spot, picks out a simple bouquet, and heads to the counter with a few crumpled bills in hand. The cashier, a woman named Sarah, can't help but notice the boy. She sees him come in every afternoon, sometimes just after school, other times later in the evening, but always with the same routine. He never says much, just hands her the money, waits for her to wrap the flowers, and then leaves without a word. At first, Sarah thought he might be running an errand for someone, maybe a family member. But after a few weeks, she began to wonder, why would a boy buy the same bouquet of flowers every single day? And who were they for? Curiosity gnawed at her. Was he buying them for his mother, a sister, maybe even a friend? But no, the way he treated the flowers was different. There was a kind of reverence in the way he held them, a quiet respect that didn't fit the image of a casual gift. Each day, Sarah expected the pattern to break, but it never did. The boy was like clockwork, his daily bouquet buying routine as steady as the sunrise. One rainy afternoon, as the boy walked in again, dripping from the storm outside, Sarah finally decided to speak up. "These are for someone special, huh?" she asked with a friendly smile, hoping to strike up a conversation. But the boy just nodded, gave her the same quiet smile, and left without offering more. Something about his silence tugged at her heart. It wasn't just the flowers. There was something deeper here, something she couldn't quite place. But it felt heavy. Weeks turned into months, and every day was the same. The boy came in, bought his flowers, and left. Sarah couldn't let it go. What was his story? Who were the flowers really for? It was driving her crazy, and she knew she had to find out. Finally, one day, she made a decision. She was going to follow him. That afternoon, she watched him leave the shop, bouquet in hand as usual, and slipped out after him, making sure to keep a distance. The boy walked briskly through the streets, heading toward a part of town Sarah rarely visited. Her heart raced with anticipation and a hint of guilt. Was it right to follow him like this? But she couldn't turn back now. The boy made his way through the neighborhood, his steps steady, despite the growing darkness. Sarah stayed close enough to see, but far enough that he wouldn't notice her. He turned a corner, and she quickened her pace, trying to catch up, her mind racing with possibilities. Was he meeting someone? Dropping off the flowers somewhere? And then, just when Sarah thought she would finally get her answers, she saw the boy stop in front of a small, unassuming building. Her breath caught in her throat as she watched him walk through the gates, flowers still in hand. It wasn't until she got closer that she realized where they were. It was a cemetery. Sarah stood frozen in place as she watched the boy kneel down by a grave, gently placing the flowers at its base. Her heart broke as she pieced together the painful truth. Tears welled up in her eyes as she realized who the flowers were for. But before she could process it all, the boy looked up and caught her watching. The boy's eyes met Sarah's, wide and startled. For a moment, neither of them moved. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest, unsure of what to say or how to explain herself. She hadn't meant to invade his privacy or disrupt something so deeply personal, but now she was standing there, exposed, with no way to turn back. Slowly, the boy stood up from where he knelt by the grave. He didn't look angry, just surprised, maybe a little confused. Sarah swallowed hard, trying to find the right words. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to follow you. I had to know," she stammered, her voice soft and apologetic. She glanced down at the grave, feeling a lump form in her throat. The headstone was simple, with a name etched into the worn stone, and a date that revealed the person buried there had passed not long ago. The boy shifted his gaze from Sarah to the grave, and then back to the flowers he had just laid down. There was a heaviness in his eyes, something far too deep for someone his age. Finally, after what felt like forever, he spoke. "They're for my mom," he said quietly. His voice was steady, but there was a fragility beneath it, as if speaking. The words made the loss more real. Sarah's heart ached. She felt the weight of his words sink into her chest. She hadn't been prepared for this, hadn't expected the story behind the flowers to be so heartbreaking. "Oh," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I'm so sorry." The boy didn't Staring at the flowers he had placed on the grave, Sarah wanted to say something, anything, to ease the pain she saw in him. But no words seemed right. What could she possibly say that would make this better? After a long silence, the boy finally spoke again. "She loved flowers," he said, his eyes still on the bouquet. "Every day she'd buy some for the house. She said they made everything feel brighter, even when things were hard." His voice wavered slightly, but he held it together, as if he had practiced telling this story in his head many times before. Sarah felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She could picture it. His mother, bringing home flowers, filling their house with color and life. And now, every day, this boy was carrying on that ritual, even though she was gone. It was an act of love, of remembrance, but also of grief. "Is that why you buy them every day?" she asked gently, though she already knew the answer. The boy nodded. "I don't want her to think I forgot," he whispered, his voice breaking just a little. "She always said flowers were a way to show someone you care. I want her to know I still care." Sarah's heart broke a little more with each word. She could see the love he had for his mother in the way he spoke, but she could also see the pain of a boy trying to hold on to something that was slipping further away with each passing day. She wanted to help, to do something, but she didn't know how. "You're doing a beautiful thing," she said softly, hoping her words would offer some comfort, however small. The boy shrugged, brushing off her compliment. "It's all I can do," he said, his voice quiet again. "She was everything to me. Now it's just me and my dad. But he doesn't really talk about her. He just works a lot. I think it's too hard for him." Sarah could feel the loneliness in his words, the weight of a burden no child should have to carry. She wondered how long it had been like this, how long this boy had been navigating his grief alone, with only the flowers as his way of coping. She wanted to reach out, to tell him that he didn't have to do this by himself. But before she could, the boy spoke again. "Sometimes I think maybe she's still here watching," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Like, maybe she knows I'm still bringing her flowers. I hope she does." Sarah's heart clenched. She could see the hope in his eyes, the desperate wish that somehow his mother would know how much he still missed her. And in that moment, Sarah realized something. The flowers weren't just about grief or memory. They were about love. This boy was holding on to love in the only way he knew how, and it was both beautiful and heartbreaking. The tension in the air was thick, and Sarah could feel the weight of all the unspoken emotions between them. She didn't know what to say or how to make it better, but she knew she couldn't just leave him there, standing alone with his sadness. "Would you like to talk about her?" Sarah asked gently, her voice soft and kind. "I mean, if you ever need to. I'm at the flower shop every day and, well, I'm a pretty good listener." The boy looked at her for a long moment, as if considering her offer. He wasn't used to people asking. wasn't used to anyone seeing the sadness he kept tucked away behind his daily routine. Finally, he nodded just once. "Maybe," he said quietly. Sarah smiled, though it was tinged with sadness. She wasn't sure what would come next, whether he'd ever take her up on the offer, or if he'd continue coming to the shop in silence, buying his flowers and leaving without a word. But for the first time, she felt like she understood, like she had seen a part of him he kept hidden from the world. As they stood there in the fading light, the boy by his mother's grave and Sarah watching from a few steps away, the moment hung between them, fragile and full of unspoken promise. The story wasn't over, not yet, and Sarah knew that whatever happened next, it was going to change both of them forever. Over the next few weeks, the boy continued his visits to the flower shop, but something had changed. Though his routine stayed the same, choosing a bouquet, handing Sarah the money, there was a quiet acknowledgement between them now. They didn't need to say much, but each time he walked in, Sarah would greet him with a soft smile, and he'd offer a shy one back. It was a small connection, but it mattered. Then, one day, the boy didn't show up. Sarah waited, watching the door as customers came and went, but there was no sign of him. She brushed it off at first. Maybe he was busy with school or had somewhere else to be. But when 2, then 3 days passed, her worry grew. The shop felt emptier without him. That boy had become a part of her day. His quiet presence, a reminder of something bigger than the usual hustle of the store. On the 4th day, Sarah decided she couldn't ignore the feeling in her gut anymore. She needed to know if something had happened. She remembered the path she'd followed that rainy day, the way he'd turned the corner toward the cemetery. With a heavy heart, she closed up the shop early and made her way toward the place where he always left the flowers. The cemetery was quiet, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the headstones. As Sarah walked between the rows of graves, she saw him. The boy was sitting on the ground, his back against his mother's grave, knees pulled up to his chest. There were no flowers today. Instead, his shoulders were slumped, and he looked smaller, somehow more fragile than ever before. Sarah approached slowly, her footsteps soft on the grass. "Hey," she said gently, trying not to startle him. He didn't look up, but she could tell he knew she was there. "I didn't have enough money today," he said, his voice small and shaky. "I couldn't buy the flowers." Sarah's heart sank. She knelt down beside him, unsure of what to say at first. The boy had been so consistent, so determined to bring flowers every day, and now he was sitting here, feeling like he had let his mother down. The weight of that was too much for anyone, let alone a boy his age. "It's okay," she said softly. "Your mom wouldn't want you to feel like this." He shook his head, his eyes brimming with tears. "I promised her. I promised I'd bring her flowers every day." His voice cracked, and Sarah could feel the pain radiating from him. It wasn't just about the flowers. It was about the promise, the memory, the love he didn't know how to hold on to without this daily ritual. Sarah sat down beside him, letting the silence stretch for a moment before speaking again. "You know, it's not the flowers that matter most," she said quietly. "It's the love behind them. You've been doing this because you love her, and that's what she would care about. She wouldn't want you to feel like you failed her." The boy wiped at his eyes with the back of his hand, but the tears kept coming. "I don't want to forget her," he whispered, the fear in his voice palpable. "I don't want her to think I don't care." Sarah's heart broke all over again, but this time, she knew what to say. "You won't forget her," she said softly. "Not ever. She's always going to be with you, in everything you do." The flowers were a beautiful way to show your love, but she knows you care. and you don't need to prove it with flowers every day. The boy was silent for a long time, his breathing shaky as he processed her words. Finally, he looked at her, his eyes filled with a kind of vulnerability Sarah had never seen before. "Do you think she's proud of me?" Sarah smiled, her own eyes misting over. "I know she is," she said firmly. "She's proud of you every single day." Something shifted in the boy then, as if the weight he'd been carrying all this time had lightened, if only just a little. He nodded, more to himself than to her, and the tears began to slow. Sarah reached out and gently placed a hand on his shoulder, offering him the comfort he so clearly needed. They sat there in the fading light, the quiet of the cemetery wrapping around them like a soft embrace. After a long while, the boy finally stood up, and Sarah rose with him. "I don't think I need to bring flowers every day anymore," he said quietly, his voice steadier now. "But I'll still come visit her, just to talk, you know." Sarah smiled, feeling a warmth in her chest. "I think that's a great idea," she said. "And if you ever want to talk to someone else, you know where to find me." The boy gave her a small, grateful smile, and for the first time, Sarah could see a flicker of peace in his eyes. They walked out of the cemetery together, side by side, neither of them speaking, but both feeling the quiet connection between them. As they reached the gate, the boy paused, looking back one last time at his mother's grave. Then he turned to Sarah. "Thanks," he said softly. Sarah nodded, her own heart full. "Anytime," she replied. And with that, they parted ways, Sarah heading back to the flower shop, and the boy walking home with a lighter step than before. The flowers had been a way to remember, but now he understood that love didn't fade with the flowers. It stayed with him, always, just like his mother's memory. As Sarah walked back, she realized the boy had taught her something too, that love, even in the simplest acts, was the most powerful thing in the world. And sometimes, it wasn't about what you did every day, but about the meaning behind it. In the end, the boy had found his peace, and so had she.